Hello and welcome to another episode of the Student Loan Planner Podcast. I have been really battling this long COVID stuff. I mentioned in the email list that I got COVID. First wedding since the beginning of the pandemic that we went to, I got it in a breakthrough case. And boy, oh boy, was it not fun. I would have to say a couple things, just like anecdotally. 13 people got it at the wedding. Everybody who got it was double vaxxed, but not triple vaxxed. So the boosters seemed to help. My wife didn't get it despite, me having it and baby having it for days with, her not knowing. So definitely, get your booster. I think that it, seemingly was very protective for the people that were exposed at this wedding that we went to. Secondly, I would be very careful to, if you think you maybe might have COVID, don't get the booster while you have COVID, because I did just that. I had COVID and then I got the booster, and then it was like maybe I had a more severe breakthrough case because I sort of layered it on top of itself. I don't know. I'm not a COVID expert. I just know that I've been feeling very ill the past couple weeks. So I'm going to talk about something that cheers me up all the time, which is student loans, right? I mean, I joke because it's like, oh man, maybe I should get like true crime content to talk about because maybe that'd be more fun. But no, I'm just kidding. You know that I do student loan content because the goal of it is to make you feel free to live your life in the best way possible. That's really the whole goal, is to have a business that serves you. And if we do that and have fun doing it, awesome. That's the number one thing. If we're not doing a good job of serving you, well, I need a gut punch to the face, if that's even a thing, I don't know, and just got to do a better job. So in the spirit of doing the best job we can, I'm going to feature a few listener questions from our voicemail, podcast voicemail. So you can leave a podcast voicemail, studentloanplanner.com/voicemail. So let's get the first one from Christy.
Hi, my name is Christy Cruz, and I have a question about Public Service Loan Forgiveness Waiver Program. I've been in the Public Service Loan Forgiveness process for 12 years, working in public service, and had the great news 2 weeks ago to see that my loan balance went down. I looked into it and figured out that 2 of my 6 loans were forgiven under the waiver. I've since gotten a letter that says, congratulations, we've applied the waiver and these 2 loans are paid in full. The letter doesn't say anything about the remaining 4 loans. So I had 2 direct Stafford loans from 2007 forgiven under the waiver. And I have 4 remaining loans that were not forgiven. 2 of them are direct consolidated from 2006, and 2 of them are direct Stafford loans from 2006. I've been in repayment on the loans that were forgiven and the ones that remain for the same amount of time. I've made the same amount of payments. I've been in the same employment. And on my FedLoan account, it still shows that the payment count under temporary extended is nearly at qualifying on all of them. And so I'm really confused by the fact that 2 loans were forgiven. It's wonderful news. I was glad to see my balance went down. But I don't know why I still have these 4 remaining loans and the debt, and why they weren't forgiven. The letter I received from FedLoan doesn't say anything about these other 4 loans. I called and asked FedLoan and got no information. They were not able to tell me really anything at all about why these were not forgiven, if they will be forgiven, if there's a process to ask questions. They did not know. And so I'm going to ask you if you can help me understand why Department of Ed would have looked at my loans, processed the 2 for forgiveness, and left me with 4 loans still to pay, even though seemingly they all should be forgiven under the waiver. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Christy talks about the PSLF waiver and why some of her loans would have been forgiven and some of them would not have been. The most obvious explanation would be if she had more than 120 payments on the loans that were forgiven and fewer than 120 payments on the loans that were not forgiven. Sometimes certain loans enter into forbearances. Certain loans might have been deferred because of a program that maybe she went to. It's hard to know without knowing Christy's NSLDS file. So the first thing I would do is run her NSLDS in our new proprietary tool that I built for the PSLF waiver to see what the credit looks like. But more realistically, what I would do if I was somebody that did not want to hire us for a consult is I would just go to the CFPB's file a complaint tool. So this is actually like pretty useful. Like whenever there's a problem with PSLF, you can go to consumerfinance.gov/complaint. That should take you to the right place. But if you want to go to the further URL, it's consumerfinance.gov/complaint/getting-started. Why would you go there? Well, what Chrissy could do is simply file a complaint with the CFPB to say, hey, 2 of my loans were forgiven, and I believe the other 4 should be as well, but FedLoan is not giving me any information about it, which is why I'm filing this complaint. And that gives them 2 weeks to reply to that. So that's the straightforward way to try to solve a problem with FedLoan. And then the more involved way to solve a problem with FedLoan is to contact your constituent services office for your congressperson or senator. Then you basically just ask for help with the federal agency. Basically, all elected representatives have this link to do that on their pages. And then you just submit a request for opening a case. And then somebody in the constituent services office of that representative or senator will call you back and make a case, and they'll get things moving. And that's the more aggressive path because it's sort of taking an outside of the box kind of approach to fixing a PSLF problem. But generally, if it is fixable, that works, I would say 95% of the time. And the CFPB complaint works, I would say maybe, I don't know, this is just real non-scientific, but maybe 80-90% of the time, and it's easier. So I would start with the CFPB complaint and see what happens. But yeah, there's all kinds of reasons. The other reason, again, it's hard to know without seeing the NSLDS file, but Christie's mentioned the consolidation loans are from 2006. There's an outside chance those loans could be FFEL consolidated loans, in which case you just have to consolidate them again. So a lot of different things that it could be, but good question, Christy. Now a question about how long will your zero payments last?
Hey, Travis. I'm in my second year of family medicine residency. And I live in Texas, a community property state. And my student loan payment is $0 based off not just COVID forbearance, but my 2019 tax returns that were currently still being based off of. When I called FedLoan last, they told me my first payment wasn't going to be until 2023. Because I make a little bit of extra income through an additional stipend program in my wife's job in 2021, should I really file separately? I'm on pay as you earn. Should I really file separately for 2021 taxes when I may not have another payment again until 2023 and that's slated to stay at $0 until then? Period? Question mark? Obviously that could change, but I'm just curious what you think about that. Thank you.
This one's interesting because this person's calculated payment is still based off of 2019 taxes, which is 2 years ago, soon to be 3 years ago. How long is that going to last? I'm getting a lot of people telling me that their loan servicer is saying they don't have to recertify until 2023. The reality is there's no guidance on this. There's no like, hey, servicers, you should all do this. So all the servicers are kind of pinging the Department of Ed and being like, hey, what should we do? And I've seen some certification dates showing 2022. I've seen some show 2023. And they really have not gone to the effort to tell people what that actually means. And they haven't been clear about it. What we've been telling people is this. You're not going to get in trouble if you do exactly what they tell you to. So you make sure your contact information is updated. Make sure your phone number is correct. Make sure you've enabled SMS messages. Make sure your address is correct in your student loan servicer's profiles. Make sure all that information is accurate. And then guess what? The burden's on them to tell you when you have to recertify your IDR plan, right? That's great because for most people, your income probably went up in 2021. Most people had that experience. If you're a physician like this person is, then a lot of physicians' incomes soar when they start getting out of training, right? So there's a huge benefit to using older tax returns to certify your income. In this case, the person's spouse has no loans and they're filing separate in a community property state. So there's no tax implications of filing separately in a community property state because you just split the income down the middle 50-50. I would say if there's no harm in it, you might as well file separately and split it that way because it makes it a little bit easier in case you do need that tax return to pay a lower amount. So I would say why not is my first thought. And then the second thought about the $0 a month payments lasting until 2023. listen, they could update that and they could say, hey, we got new guidance from the Department of Ed. Now we need everybody to certify in 2022. But I would say, this is a very sort of borrower-focused Department of Education. They're very concerned about helping borrowers and also helping borrowers pay less. So I would say, I wouldn't be surprised if the guidance they gave was, no need to recertify until 2023, in which case, yeah, your IBR payment would stay at $0 a month for a really extended period of time, which is obviously really great. That's the default answer that I'm giving to people, is just sort of wait and take your time and don't rush things, because no need to, as long as it's qualifying payments, as long as they're not asking you to recertify, you don't have to unless they ask you to. Hopefully that's helpful. All right, now let's talk about the main news going on right now. And this is a fast-moving, fluid situation. So hopefully it all still applies once this comes out. But you might have heard of the EICR plan, Expanded Income-Contingent Repayment. So this is the bureaucratically named name of the new income-driven repayment plan that the Department of Education is trying to come up with. And it's just so ironic. It's just so sad and funny and just weird. I say all these things just because as a close observer of the student loan process, this is partly why student loans are so confusing, is because of the exact process the Department of Education is taking to get to this point and to come up with the plan that they came up with. It's just so laughable. It's something out of a what is that Shakespeare play, Comedy of Errors or something like that. So let's talk about, I talked about the history of income-driven repayment plans in a couple podcasts ago. So go back and listen to that if you want the deep dive. But part of the issue is we have a Congress that can't do anything. The Higher Education Act is supposed to be regularly reauthorized, which defines things like cancellation that might happen, or forgiveness, or income-based repayment options. And that hasn't happened in forever. That hasn't happened in a super long time because Congress hates each other's guts, I guess. So because that's not happened, there's this huge opening to do things that Congress is sort of not doing. And so, in a sort of Democratic administration like the Obama administration, they said, well, let's get borrowers more relief. But the problem is you have to operate within the statute. The statute says new income-based repayment is this, that you can't just say, well, no, it's not, it's this, right? In other words, there's things in the statute where there's maybe some room to make new programs through regulation, but it's very clear that other programs through regulation are not allowed. So, for example, there's a couple definitions of the old IBR program that say, for a period of 25 years until forgiveness, you shall do this, right? Whereas the income contingent repayment plan, which was an older plan, says that you shall offer forgiveness for a period not to extend past 25 years. So the administration sees that opening, says, well, why not let people pay 20 years until forgiveness instead of 25? And then they'll look at the percent of payments and they say EICR says no more than 20% of your income. Well, they say, well, it says no more than, so we can say 10% of income. But the problem is if you do that, since you're trying to operate around the statutes to get something passed that you can actually provide borrowers with relief with, you have to make a bunch of weird rules, like saying, borrowers can access pay-as-you-earn only if they're new borrowers past October 1st, 2007, and they took out at least one loan after October 1st, 2011. Or you need to say the repay plan only applies to people with direct loans, not FFEL loans. And so it's just a very odd process. And so right now we're in the heat of something called negotiated rulemaking. This is the sort of big meeting that's expected to happen that will influence student loan policy probably at least for the next 2 or 3 years, maybe longer than that. And what is coming out of this group is a lot of stuff that wouldn't really be of interest to our audience, pre-dispute arbitration and, for-profit schools and things like that. There's a lot of processes for default and just things that tend to affect more lower income people. Most of our audience obviously has a graduate degree. And so the things that would be of interest to more of the higher income, higher educated audience that listens to this podcast is this new income-driven repayment plan, EICR, as well as changes to public service loan forgiveness. So the thing about the public service loan forgiveness changes is that those are still coming out of this committee, and it's probably going to be towards the direction of the PSLF waiver while not as good. So for example, these FFEL loans and different things like that with the waiver that can qualify, that's going to get shut off in October 31st, 2022, because that's a statutory thing that, you can't really forgive FFEL loans. And they're claiming emergency authority to make a lot of these changes. Yeah, but maybe I'll be surprised. Maybe they'll interpret it and say they can or something. I don't know. But it seems to me that, they're going to try to expand the definition of qualifying employer. They're going to try to expand the ability for people to get PSLF by counting certain kinds of forbearances and deferments. That could potentially be really awesome if somebody, say, does a residency deferment. We have to see, but maybe there's an outside chance that could count towards PSLF. So people might have to make any payments in residency, which would be cool. We will see. We'll monitor that. There's a lot of things that may or may not be coming out of this. Better processes for counting payments, just things like that. So PSLF, we're monitoring that. The sort of the big news in my mind is the proposed regulatory text for the EICR plan that came out of the committee. And this is showing you what Department of Education is thinking in terms of what this plan should look like and who should benefit and what the implications would be for you. So the big kind of shocking news was this would really not help Parent Plus borrowers, and this would also not help graduate school borrowers. In other words, they made this new income-driven plan, EICR, exclusively available to people for undergrad. And even among the undergrad, loan folks, they specifically stated that they wanted to create a plan that helped people with mostly all undergrad loans instead of helped people with graduate school loans. The members of the committee that's negotiating these rules were very opposed to that. So they brought up things like borrowers of color disproportionately borrowing for graduate school. They brought up just the ask of why do we need to carve out this benefit for people that have graduate school loans? And so that's a very big consensus that they pushed back on, that they want graduate school borrowers to get access to this plan. So we'll see, right? And what are the changes that they made in this? It's still 20 years till forgiveness. So it's kind of similar to pay as you earn in terms of the years until forgiveness. But that they had looked at the percent of income that you would pay, and it's a little different. So currently the 150% is the poverty line deduction you get before you pay $1 on your student loans, right? If you make up to, as a single person, about $18,000, you can pay $0 a month on your student loans. So this new definition would say 200% of the poverty line. So if you make up to 200% of the poverty line, you'd pay nothing. So if you made, as a single person, $24,000, then you would pay nothing. If you make between 200 and 300% of the poverty line, you would pay 5% of your income from that range. For example, somebody who makes $36,000 who's single would pay 5% of the difference between $36,000 and $24,000. So they'd pay 5% of $12,000 a year, or, about, what is that, $600, about $50 a month, right? Now, for income above 300% of the poverty line, you would still pay 10%. So for most people, this would actually only save probably like $100 to $200 a month off of your income-based repayment plan. That would literally be the only difference. And furthermore, one of the things we're looking at too, well, I should say that they have some interesting ideas on interest subsidies. Basically, in this case, if you have a $0 calculated payment, your interest would be zero, not just 50% of whatever's not covered by the payment, like repay is only a 50% subsidy. This would be 100% subsidy, but only for periods where your calculated income-based repayment number is zero. So that would be an interesting additional, layer of things that you could do. But the problem is graduate school borrowers aren't eligible for it, at least not in this first draft. The other interesting thing I thought about it was that it proposes to treat this new EICR plan the same way that they treat repay, which is another thing that would really not benefit graduate school borrowers, because you get married and a lot of times you marry somebody who doesn't have student loans. And then with the repay plan's a good plan if you're single. If you get married, though, it becomes a lot less attractive. And so when somebody's eligible for pay, we're like, awesome. They can file separate and pay based on their income is a lot easier, right? But whenever your options are IBR and repay, it definitely makes refinancing a whole lot more attractive. that's another thing they asked is like, should they put this plan under the repay section for income tax treatment, or should they put it under the repay section for, the pay section or the repay section for how they treat married filing separate. So this is clear to me that the Department of Education's headed down the same sort of rabbit hole, kind of bad path that they've done in the past. What's the problem? Well, we don't like the student loan crisis. What's the solution? Let's make another plan. Right? It's just so like, I don't know, it's just so naive and so foolish, if you ask me. I mean, if I'm going to be frank, because it makes the student loan system even more complicated. It excludes a big class of borrowers. It's not really all that more generous than the existing plans. It's trying to bypass Congress to create something more generous. So they're being really cautious in how much additional they do. I think possibly because, I don't know, one of the ranking committee members on the House Education Committee, who's a Republican, showed up to the public rulemaking of this public comment section of this negotiated rulemaking process. And he was literally like, I like some of what y'all are doing, like good work on the interest capitalization stuff that's making the interest not balloon, but he's like, but don't go too crazy with this, because remember, we're going to take the House next year, and then, we're going to be trying to repeal everything as soon as we take the White House in 2024. It's like, oh my gosh. So I think that Department of Ed is very cognizant that they have what's fair to say based off of watching the committee hearings is more of like the progressive wing of the Democratic Party on this negotiated rulemaking committee. And they're trying to get borrowers relief with also trying to not get any in trouble with legal stuff or legal challenges or anything. I guess it's kind of weird. It almost seems like they're trying to have a lot of progressive voices in the committee, but they're not like fully listening to them. I don't know how to interpret it really, because this proposal was a lot more moderate than I was kind of expecting, to be honest. So this wouldn't really change anything in terms of refinancing or not. This is like not a generous policy at all for graduate school borrowers. Now, what happens if graduate school borrowers got included in this? Even if you could file separately on this, and graduate school borrowers were included, well, yeah, I would probably replace the need for all the other plans, but only if they allow you to file married filing separately and exclude your spouse's income. And I don't think they necessarily want to allow that, because if you have 20 years till forgiveness, a lower calculated payment, well, it's only useful if you can file separately, because then you don't need pay, then you don't need new IBR, which is basically like pay, that you don't need repay, you don't need EICR. So that's kind of their goal, is to reduce the number of plans and to try to narrow it down. And then yet this new plan they're creating is literally going to create a new line item on the promissory note that gives people access to their income-driven repayment plan sort of in perpetuity, even if they make a new plan. So it's like just a giant mess. And it just kind of makes me think about like, oh yeah, like this is how we got to this terrible setup in the student loan world, is administrations wanted to create a lot of relief for borrowers without doing anything in Congress, because they frankly couldn't because of gridlock. And so you try to create a new plan, and then it's just a mess. So I don't know, like what would I do different? I mean, either do something that's better or don't do anything. Either do something that's materially better in terms of the income-driven repayment plans, or do nothing at all, because you're just creating extra confusion in the system. But from what it seems like, that's not what they're going to do. They're going to come out with a new plan. Maybe they'll add in, graduate school borrowers to this. I don't know, though, because it certainly seems like if they do add graduate school borrowers, they might make the payment term 25 years instead of 20. It's really interesting to see what they're doing. To be fair, if we're going to be like even keeled about it and not sort of self-interested in trying to benefit our audience, right? Like, why are they doing this? Well, it's true that borrowers of color borrow disproportionately for graduate school compared to Caucasian borrowers or not underrepresented borrowers. But it's also true that white borrowers borrow the most cumulatively of all. So in other words, while Black borrowers might have to borrow at a higher rate, so you might have more people borrowing disproportionately for graduate school, the amounts might be very different. right? So I don't know. It's really kind of an interesting problem because if you look at the undergrad market, like borrowers of color defaulting that are in undergrad, type of degrees or some college completed degrees, like that is kind of like primarily the default problem. There's not really a default problem for graduate school loans at all. I mean, it's just very rare that a graduate school borrower defaults because you're very educated, you know the rules, you know that the payment's always affordable. The size of the debt relative to income generally provides you an option for a income-driven repayment that's more affordable. How do I mean that? Well, consider a social worker with a $50,000 income and a $150,000 balance. Well, she's going to pay $200 a month. Now consider a assistant manager at a restaurant who took some college completed, maybe makes, let's say, $30,000 and has $10,000 of student loans. Well, what's that person's calculated IBR payment? Well, 150% of the poverty line, so that's $18,000 deduction. So they have to pay 10% on $12,000. So that turns out to be about $100 a month. So that cutoff means that they might not even qualify for income-based repayment. So they just assume they have to pay $100 a month. Well, since they don't really qualify for income-based repayment because they're right at that cutoff, let's say they have a period of job instability, well, their $100 a month payment continues because they don't know to call up and recalculate their payment. Now they go into default. So in fact, it's like very difficult for undergrads to get forgiveness, just if you think about it, because how often does an undergrad borrow more than $30,000? I mean, half the time, right? Because the average student loan debt's like 35, right? So half of the people and that's not the median, obviously, but let's just say that it was. So like half people borrow more, half people borrow less. So there's a lot of people out there that are struggling that owe $20,000 from a degree that ended up kind of being somewhat useless. And that's the goal of the Department of Education with this round of negotiated rulemaking, is to help that person, because that's the person that needs the help the most. And I think that's probably true. If you think about the benefit of the payment and interest waiver or pause, who did that disproportionately go to? Graduate degree professionals. Because your Starbucks barista that has a $10,000 student loan may be received because they have, subsidized Stafford interest rates. So maybe they only have a 3 or 4% interest rate. Maybe they got like almost 2 years of interest pause. That's about like what, $700-800? That's the benefit they got for the payment and interest waiver, $700 over almost 2 years. And oh, by the way, their payments of $100 a month were paused. So that's something. Let's say that person is, entry-level worker at some corporate spot in Boston. Will go across town to one of Harvard's hospitals, and you've got a general surgeon making, or, some surgical specialist, right, making $600,000 a year, finally supposed to pay on their, income-based repayment, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month. But that got waived for 2 years. So they saved $50,000 in the first year, and then maybe another $30,000, $40,000 in the next period. So, even if that person was going into private practice, that they got $30,000 or $40,000 a year of interest subsidies, that person got close to maybe $100,000 of student loans canceled, and the person that's the working class person that had some college completed got $700 of student loans canceled. It's kind of showing you how the inequality of the student loan system works. Even stuff that's designed to relieve borrowers from stress, it ends up disproportionately benefiting higher educated, higher indebted, often, not always, higher income people. So I think that's why the Department of Education is pushing back here and saying, no, we want this new IDR plan to be very generous for undergrads, although I would argue it's not even really that generous. So what does this mean, this new income-driven repayment plan? It probably means most of our audience can realize that this is not a big thing that's going to hugely impact them. I would say people that at Kaiser Permanente type employers that work in a for-profit physician group, that work at a not-for-profit hospital, you need to still be paying attention because there could be changes in the definition of PSLF. We're still monitoring that. But if you're hoping for a super generous, pay 5% of your income type of IBR plan, that does not seem like it's happening. Let's not be negative Nancy Travis here for a second. And let's talk about something positive. So I thought a little bit about, why does debt make people feel trapped? It's because it represents a monthly payment. It's because it represents something that you can't get out of. You're stuck with it. And that huge monthly payment means that that money is not going towards your goals. It's not going towards buying a house or saving for your kids' college or getting married or retiring early or investing in real estate or index funds or your retirement. Having debt makes you feel compelled to work, possibly in a job that you don't like. Let's contrast that to an income tax. An income tax is never something that needs to stop you. An income tax is something that never needs to hold you back or make you sad. And why do I know that? Well, if income taxes were the primary determinant of my happiness, no one would live in the state of California because it's taxed out the wazoo, right? Why do people live there anyway? It's because the weather is gorgeous. It's a beautiful state, all kinds of awesome national parks and outdoors. You can be super close to the mountains and the beach at the same time, which is kind of awesome. I didn't even realize that was possible until I took a van life trip once to California when I was when we were, didn't have a baby yet. So it's a great place, and people live there because it makes their lives better. And if somebody was super bothered by income tax, well, there's always Nevada. You can always go live in Reno, right? So why do student loans not have to make you feel like you're trapped, in a cage, like you have no way out? It's because we know that student loans are an income tax. And if you're really smart about planning and you're really smart about how you set things up for your loan strategy, then you can pay a percent of your income towards your student loans. And then that's actually pretty doable. Because if you think about 10% of your income, it's not 10%. It's often 6 to 8% because of how big of a deduction you get for the 150% of the poverty line plus your retirement savings that you're doing. So you can get that contribution towards your student loans down to 6 to 8% of your income usually. Sometimes you can get it even lower. Sometimes you can do some, tricky stuff with pay repay, one spouse on pay, one spouse on repay. Sometimes you can file separate. Sometimes you can do community property loophole stuff. There's all kinds of stuff you can do that's real smart to get that required payment lower. Think about it like having a good CPA that's able to find deductions for you and get your taxable income lower, right? It's pretty similar. So you can get that payment down to 6 to 8% of your income. Well, on top of that, you need to do about generally 1 to 5% of your income towards your tax bomb. That's your monthly savings going into a brokerage account so you can access that money and pay the taxes with it at the end of the 20 years towards forgiveness. So all in, maybe that's 7% to 13% of your income going towards student loans. Recall that the money you're putting into the tax bomb is probably going to be refunded to you in the sense of you'll get to keep it at the end of the 20 years, because I don't think they're going to charge the tax bomb eventually. I've said that for a while, that I don't think they're going to do that because I don't think the political will is going to be there to do it. A 7 to 13% income tax, well, that's not great, right? But your profession is your California. This might not make sense if you're like, oh my gosh, California, I would never live there. But, if you do think that California is a pretty state, work with me here for a second. So your degree that made you a veterinarian or a social worker or a lawyer or chiropractor or doctor or dentist or naturopath, acupuncturist, pharmacist, PT, OT. I know I'm forgetting at least one major profession, so I apologize in advance. But that profession that you're doing hopefully makes you happier than sitting behind a desk working on boring, useless reports that no one's going to read all day. That's why you went to graduate school, isn't it? So that you could help people make a higher income, have more economic stability, learn something interesting, have value, and feel like you have a good purpose in life that you enjoy. Contrast that to working in corporate America. Sometimes that's better, sometimes it's not. Grass is always greener, right? So hopefully you at least are marginally happier in the profession that you're in, and you feel like, well, maybe I'm not in love with being a dentist, but how many people could work 3 days a week and make $80,000? A whole lot of people couldn't do that. Certainly you have a hard time doing that with just a bachelor's degree, especially in a guaranteed income that would be around even in a recession. You'd still be able to get a good job and be able to do that arrangement. So there's a lot of things to love about the profession that you signed up for, even if it has a psychic toll to it. What does that mean? Well, take your income. Is it higher or less than what you would make as a bachelor's degree holder? Probably higher. Most people with graduate degrees make more. Might not be a ton more, but generally it is a lot more. Usually bachelor's degree, maybe 50,000, and you come out of grad school and, unless you're a social worker or, sort of a lower income, like public servant, right? Like teacher or something like that. Generally speaking, you're going to make at least 10% more than what you would have made as a bachelor's degree holder. In a lot of cases, you make twice as much or more than twice as much. So even if you are making only about 10% more because of your graduate degree, remember student loans at their worst are a 7 to 13% income tax when you add on the tax bomb. So wipe out that 7 to 13% income tax off of your postgraduate degree income, and that's your net income as if you had zero student loans. So if you lived in Nevada, your net income having zero student loans, right? In other words, if you are a student loan borrower in Nevada, you are the exact same as somebody that owes zero student loans and lives in California. That's because Nevada has no state income tax. California is around 10. So add on 10% income tax in Nevada with no state income tax. Your total tax, not including federal, is 10%. California, you use 0% tax on, if you have no student loans, but you have this 10% state income tax. So those two people would be equivalent from an income tax perspective. In other words, your profession is like living in a higher cost, higher tax state that gives you much better quality of life or more interesting things that you get to do. And recall that if you decide, this is not my dreamboat profession, I don't like this anymore. Well, remember, you can always move abroad. You can always go to Australia or New Zealand or Dubai. I've had a couple people do that. And then you can earn over $108,000 abroad and pay zero taxes on it in the U.S. You might have to pay local taxes, but you won't have to report anything in the U.S. And then your U.S. income would be zero. You could report almost zero income and pay a $0 a month student loan benefit or student loan payment, which would still qualify you for forgiveness after 20 years. So if you don't like living in the high tax state, aka your profession, you can still leave it. You can go back and get a different degree. You can go back and move to a different country. You still have a lot of options. So debt, and student debt in particular, never needs to make you feel trapped. There's always a way out. There's always solutions. You will be okay. And you just have to be changing your mindset and getting the help that you need. Obviously, thanks for listening to this podcast. We're, as a company, struggling with availability for getting people timely appointments, which is a good and bad thing. I mean, obviously, I'm happy that we're helping people and that a lot of people need our services right now, which means that we're hopefully relieving a lot of anxiety. But I do feel guilty that, why don't we have more appointment slots? And it's probably every business owner's feeling during this pandemic, trying to figure out staffing, trying to figure out available slots and how many to offer and things like that. So if you need a plan, studentloanplanner.com/book. You can reserve one, I think, 60 to 90 days in advance if you wanted to. And I think that some people are doing that. They're going and booking way off in the future just to lock in a specific time of day they want and things like that. Also, remember that if you want to ask a question on the podcast, there's still a lot of room to do that. studentloanplanner.com/voicemail. You can ask questions and we'll answer those live on the show. You can use your first name. You can be anonymous. You can give us your full name, whatever you want. And also refinancing is really picking up. I think some people are getting nervous with the chair of the Fed is talking about how he's going to wind up stimulus for the bond markets a lot faster than expected, which could lead to rising interest rates. So we're seeing an uptick of people refinancing right now with the interest pause getting close to being over with. studentloanplanner.com/refi is the link to go there and get those bonuses up to $1,000. So thank you for listening to the show. We'll, of course, update you. Hopefully, I don't have long COVID. Always appreciate all the encouraging notes. People that had experiences getting infected and getting better. It's always encouraging. So thanks for shooting me notes as well. I'm proud of my voice for holding out. Lung capacity is seemingly okay today. I don't know. I'll stop rambling. You guys have a great week. Thank you for listening to the Student Loan Planner Podcast. Have a wonderful rest of your day.